He grew up in theater and he had a Barbie as a kid, and he just was not a traditional boy, but he was still a boy. His point in that sermon, I think it's really important, is that the culture's view of gender is actually far more narrow than God's view of gender.
Hey, welcome to the Live Like It's True podcast, where we talk through some of the most astonishing stories in the Bible and how to live like those stories are true. I'm your host, Shannon Popkin, and my hope is that these conversations will inspire you to better know the story, share the story, and live the story. What does it mean to image God? What does it mean to be male or female? And how are these two ideas related? The answer to these questions are found on the earliest pages of our Bible, tucked into our origin story in Genesis 1. I'm so thankful to have my friend Kelly Needham back with us to talk through some of the weightiest questions that our culture is wrestling with. Kelly brings such wisdom and clarity to each of the conversations we get to have with her. You'll remember that Kelly joined me for our first ever episode on Live Like It's True, the true story on the roof, which remains our most popular episode of all time. I encourage you to go listen to that conversation. We will include a link in the show notes along with other ways to find Kelly and her ministry. Kelly teaches the Bible at her home church and co-leads a women's teaching program there, which I got to be part of at Stonegate Church in Texas this year. Kelly is also the author of Friendish and an upcoming book called Purposefooled: Why Chasing Our Dreams, Finding Our Calling, and Reaching for Greatness Fails Us, and What We're Really Meant to Live For. I'm looking forward to that book. Kelly and her husband, Jimmy, are also the hosts of a brand new podcast called Clearly. If it's complex, confusing, or controversial, it's covered here, they say. So I know you'll want to check out that brand new podcast that just launched this September. All right, let's jump into our conversation with Kelly about male and female. Kelly Needham, welcome back to Live Like It's True.
I'm so glad to be here with you, Shannon. It's always one of my favorite things to talk about the Bible with you.
Oh, and it is such a blessing. You are one of those friends that you so encouraged me to be in the Word, to be a student of the Word, to love the Word. So I could not think of a better guest to have here with me today. So your big news is you are expecting baby number
5.
You did 10 though there.
Oh, sorry.
She just held up. You can't see it.
2 hands that had 5 because excited. Baby number 5.
Baby number 5. And I was just saying that I watched a little video, people do these baby reveal things. And what did you have? An exploding something?
Exploding balloon with blue confetti in it.
Blue confetti, yeah. But what I noticed was your daughter, when I saw her in the video, she was so excited. She had her hand over her mouth. She's so cute. And I thought, oh my goodness, there is a little Kelly right there. Is that the one that you think looks like you or resembles you in some way?
Oh, yes. She is the one who takes after me. My parents, in watching her grow up, have told me so many times, Kelly, she is just like you, looks just like you when you were little. And our assistant actually just found an old picture of me, a childhood picture, and she texted me and said, "This is miniature. So this is your daughter. I see her in your face, So
Yeah.
my other daughter looks like my husband. So it's interesting that it worked out that way. They're not quite a full true blend. We've got one of each.
That's so fun. And, I have 2 boys that don't look alike. One of my boys looks a lot like me. The other one is kind of a blend of us, but we had something really cute happen recently. So Cade is our youngest son, and he is a camp counselor this summer. And there was a boy in his cabin who said to him, "Cade, you remind me of Mr. Cole." And he said, "Tell me more about that. Who's Mr. Cole?" And they put it together. And my other son, Cole, who looks nothing like Cade, does after school mentoring in this boy's school. It's just this kind of like a big brother program. And he was his mentor. And this boy put it together. He thought they resembled each other. I thought, wow, how sweet is that? And I mean, the icing on the cake is that this boy came to be a believer in Jesus that week at camp, which was just the neatest thing, that both of my boys got to represent Jesus in the life of this kid. And so we're going to kind of talk about representing Jesus and being the
Mhm.
image of God spread across the face of the earth. Such an exciting text.
Mhm.
This is the beginning, Kelly. This story is, I've heard several authors say it's like the seedbed for the rest of the Bible. It has
Mhm.
so many every little piece is so important. And these verses, we can't overstate the
Mhm.
importance. And so I'm wondering if you could just start out our time then by reading Genesis 1:26 through 31 in the NASB translation.
I would love to. So Genesis 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth."
Okay, so we're wrapping up this creation story with this sixth day. And Kelly, what I think is so interesting is, this is our origin story as the human race. This is
Mhm.
our origin story. And we don't find out our beginning in a statement or a document, but it's a story. And it opens with, then God said, let us make
Mhm.
man in our own image. Like God is like talking to himself, hey, let's start this,
Mhm.
let's grow this community. It doesn't start with just a document. This is how it was in the beginning. It's like it's a story
Right.
unfolding. What do you see in those opening verses where God says, let us make man in our own image? Like what's
Mm.
surprising here?
Well, I think the first thing that's surprising in Genesis 1 is let us.
Right.
When God said, let us, I mean, that if you're reading through Genesis 1, that is kind of jarring because that's the first time God speaks of, I think that's the first time that God speaks of himself. And when he does, he speaks of himself in a plurality. Let
Yeah.
us make man in our image according to our likeness. And then he's talking about them, let them rule over. So you see plurality in God, and the thing that he's creating in his image is plural as well. There's male and female. So you see community more than something just singular on both ends of that. And
Mm.
that's not what you expect, I don't think. I think it would make more sense. We'd expect to maybe read God saying, "I'm going to make a man
Hmm.
in my image," and then from there I'll unfold it. But we have instead let us make
Yeah.
them, which he says man, but then he refers to that man as them. So
Yeah.
that to me is so surprising. I mean, we're
Yes.
used to maybe this verse, maybe we're familiar with it, but honestly, if we're first reading it without any context, it would be surprising.
I agree. And especially coming off of the days 1 through 5, God is saying, let there be, and let the animals come from the earth. I think it says, and then let them reproduce after their own kind. But this is far more personal. God's like
Mm-hmm.
rolling his sleeves up, and we're going to see him in the next chapter. Like he's going to form the man out of the dust and he's going to form the woman out of the rib. So he is
Mm-hmm.
very personally involved, but that plurality, yeah, like that is interesting. Is this the first time that we get the idea of the Trinity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yes.
and just explain what is the Trinity in case somebody doesn't know.
Yes, the word Trinity doesn't actually appear in the scriptures, but it has been through church history our way to describe this idea that God has revealed himself as one God, but existing in three persons: the Father, the Son, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit. And that doesn't all come out in Genesis 1:26, but we see it come out very clearly over throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament. That's the commissioning that Jesus gives before he sends. Baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So we see Jesus affirm that triune unity of God. But I
Mhm.
think here is our first little hint at it, that it says, then God, singular, said, let us. He didn't say let me. He said let
Right.
us. And we don't speak like that about ourselves. I don't say let us make a sandwich. If I'm saying that, I'm talking probably to my kids as well as myself. I'm not
Well,
referring to me.
and
But God is different.
if you do, there's some concern there, Kelly, if you start talking about yourself
Yes.
in plurality.
Yes. Please be
Um,
concerned for me if that happens.
but okay, so he says, let's make man in our image after our likeness. So
Mhm.
there's two words here, image and likeness, and it's almost like they're kind of rounding out the idea. Both are
Mhm.
important, but talk about those words. What's interesting about image and likeness?
Well, I'll talk about likeness first because I think it's easier to understand for us. Because to say that my daughter takes after my likeness
Hmm.
does not mean that she is me. And it
Right.
does not mean that she is an exact representation of me. It does not mean that. It means that she is like me, that there are enough similarities for somebody to see us and go, oh, those things are related. Those things are together. And so for us to be made according, as he says, according to our likeness, we know that there's similarity, but it's not exact.
Hmm.
That's one thing I think that comes from that word. And then in our image, we don't speak like that very much, but we talk about images. That the other clear place you see that word in the scriptures is when God talks about not making an image in the Ten Commandments. You shall not
Hmm.
make an image, right?
Hmm.
Like an idol. You
Yeah.
shouldn't carve something that you would say this is like God. And so, which we'll see here is because we are the image. We don't need to
Right.
carve a small one, but an image is like a representation of something.
Hmm.
You, when I think about the word image, cameras come to mind. I think about if I took a picture of myself and I showed it to you, it'd be like, oh, that's an image of you. But it
Hmm.
isn't you, but it is a likeness, a representation. It helps people know what I look like. Maybe like on your driver's license, it lets somebody know, oh, that's what you look like. But to see you in the flesh is different. So those are very similar words.
Right. And I think icon is also a, a term that we've become more familiar with. It's like a little image on my computer screen that represents a whole application or a whole file. But I know by looking at that, that it represents something bigger, that,
Mhm.
it's just a representation, but it's something. And that's what, that we are created to be these little likenesses, these little images
Mhm.
of God. And what I think is interesting too, that word, I don't know how to say it, but the Hebrew word for image is salam,
Mhm.
and probably saying it wrong. And it means that it's cut from something bigger. It's like, if you think of cut from the same cloth. And in that word, salam, it's translated idol a whole bunch of other
Mhm.
places, because the understanding was that this idol, that people would worship idols, these graven images,
Mhm.
these things made of wood and stone, but they weren't just worshiping some wood or some stone. They thought it represented an immaterial God, and
Mhm.
the thought was that God would breathe life into this little idol, like
Mhm.
that God, that, whatever, the God, the wind God, or I'm making this up, Kelly. I don't know
Yes.
anything about those gods, those little g gods, but whatever that God was would breathe life into this little icon or this little idol.
Mhm.
And look at the imagery, though, for us, like how God was using these false gods to help us understand. No, it's like that with you too.
Mhm.
We're cut from the same cloth as God. And we're going to see God breathe life into Adam. But like, okay,
Mhm.
so you said, maybe your child has, you've got daddy's eyes, you've got mommy's hands,
Mhm.
you've got God's what? Fill in the blank. How are we like God? How do we resemble him?
I know that is now we're getting into the territory that books and books and books have been written
Yes.
about. But it does give us a hint in the next verse, in verse 27, which I think is helpful because we need to know, what does that mean that we're made in the likeness of God?
Yeah, go
But
ahead
he
and read it.
says, okay, yeah, in verse 27, it says, God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. So we're getting this little triad 3 phrases in this verse that are helping us understand what it means to be made in his image. And then he ends it with male and female, he created them. So we see 2 genders in one humanity created, that information is connected to this idea that man has been created in God's image. Mankind, the species of man made in God's image, what that means. The only thing he really gives us is male and female, that there are 2 different genders in existing in one humanity. That's what he's told us. That's how you look like me. And that's it. I mean, there's really not anything else given in black and white in the text to go. Also, the fact that you have hair, or the fact that you have 2 arms, it doesn't say that, or the fact that you speak a language. I mean, it doesn't, we could make inferences, but what it tells us here is that there are boys and there are girls, there are men and there are women, and something about that is tied to, we are in the image of God.
Wow, that's profound. Now, I heard your husband preach a sermon on this text, and he used this illustration that I thought was so powerful. It was so helpful to me. Can you share that illustration with us?
Yes. Yeah. He was preaching on this very text, and he talked about self-portraits. And he actually showed in the sermon on the screen a few famous self-portraits of different artists that they wanted to portray themselves to the world. And there were unique elements these artists put in the portrait that they wanted to communicate something about themselves in it. It was all intentional. And what Jimmy said in his sermon is, here we see in verse 26 and 27, God creating a self-portrait, that he is creating a representation of his likeness. And the way that he does that is with 2 different canvases, 2 different types of people. He creates men and he creates women. He doesn't just create one gendered humanity, which he could have done and found a way to let them to procreate and multiply without there being 2 genders. But that's not what God did. He chose 2 different canvases, 2 genders that are distinct from one another. When a baby is born, it's easy to tell, are they a boy or a girl? And yet they're complementary, that we know these 2 genders together physically fit together, sexually, and reproduce to make more of themselves. And so we see the same kind of thing there, that there is one humanity. So there are even men and women that were different. We know a person from an animal. You can line a bunch of creatures up and be able to point to, those are people and those are animals, or that is a plant, right? We know there's one humanity, but within that humanity, there's diversity, unity and diversity. The same thing that is in God. God is one God, unity, but he is also diverse. He's 3 persons. And I think that is one of the key reasons that it's important, the genders are important, that they represent that diversity and unity in humanity, which is part of God's self-portrait, part of the ways he wants to make himself known to the world.
Yeah, I think I remember Jimmy saying, if you are, he talked about the self-portraits. If you're going to create a self-portrait, well, you and me, we would just start with one canvas. But if you are a plural being, then you have to have 2 canvases to represent your plurality. And so there's something about our being a community that images God in a way, like animals, they might have ways that they flock or whatever, but we know each other. We have this community, and especially within marriage, we're just getting our first glimpses at marriage here, where we know each other. In that word "know" in the Bible, it's a sexual union. That's what that word means. And so there's something about that images God and helps us to understand who he is. So God creates these 2 genders, male and female. So you're talking about, we've got unity and diversity. So we just talked about unity, but then let's talk a second about diversity. Men and women are different, right? We're different all the way down to our DNA. Like every cell in our bodies are different. And you take any cell from a woman's body and you can tell she is female. Same with man. And so our bodies are different. We think differently, we respond differently to things. Studies have been done to show just all of the differences. Like we are completely different. And so that diversity represents God. How though? Why is it better to take a group of men and women together to image God than just a group of women or just a group of men?
Yeah. When I think about that, my first thought is there must be something about the contrast that is attractive to God, the distinctness of it, which men and women are different in our builds and in like our frame, physical frame, right? How we carry ourselves, all the things that you said. And those differences don't really stick out till you are together. You get a group of women together. I think about, when I first got married, this is true for a lot of men and women who get married, and you've only lived with people of the same gender. And now you're living with somebody of a different gender, and you're like, whoa, this is very different. The contrast, the exposure to something different highlights the uniqueness of each gender, that if you just kept them all separate, we wouldn't really be aware of what makes the glories of womanhood or the glories of manhood, because those things that are distinct to each gender wouldn't really be highlighted, but to put them together actually highlights those things. And that makes me think that that's important to God about his own nature, that he is one God, but there's something different about the person of Jesus than the person of the Father. And they are the same. They are in essence the same, but yet in personhood are distinct. And those distinctions are beautiful and lovely and good and valuable and important. And even the ways that we see them operating differently and how they work together, that's important to God to highlight and to preserve in the thing that he created to be an image of himself, that those two distinct things and yet are part of the same was important to him. And that tells us that there's something lovely about the diversity of God, that he is one and yet three persons. And that should, that makes me think too, as a Bible student, as I keep reading the scriptures, when I learn about the Holy Spirit and the function and role of the Spirit and who the Spirit is as a person, those distinctions are lovely and valuable, and I should pay attention to them. And who Jesus is, how he is portrayed in the scriptures, are important and valuable and lovely. And who the Father is, those are valuable and lovely. And those distinctions should matter to me because they matter to him to highlight in the image bearers he created, that he would give a little glimpse of that for us to see in the day-to-day as we interact with one another.
Beautiful response there, Kelly. I love that. And I love too, the diversity, not just between male and female, but as image bearers, we are all unique. I mean, apparently God likes variety because we all have unique fingerprints. We all have unique, like our retina scans are unique. Our DNA is different. I read somewhere, I think this was Lois Verberg mentions, there's a rabbi who would say that a king mints 1,000 coins with his image on them. So he stamps his image into 1,000 coins and they all look the same. But the Lord God makes a multitude of image bearers and they're all unique. And there's something about God that he likes to represent himself in our unique imaging of him. Like he doesn't do duplicates. Isn't that kind of neat?
It's awesome. Which also means there's a lot of diversity within manhood and womanhood.
Yes.
Actually within masculinity, there is great variety of expressions that you even see in the scriptures. You see David playing the harp and weeping and writing poetry, and then you see men, like Paul marching into, the city before he's saved to take people captive. Exactly. And then God saves him and he's going to get stoned and march back into the city and keep preaching. We just see variety, and the same for women. You see a lot of diversity within manhood and womanhood, but yet still a preservation of those genders. But there's a lot of diversity in our expression of our humanity that is beautiful to God and valuable to him.
Right. And we would be so naive to not recognize that, gender and representing your gender is such a hot topic today. Right. And I wonder if it would just ease up all of the pressure if we could just allow for there being such diversity within these genders. One of my favorite parts of that sermon that I listened to that Jimmy did was at the end, he was talking about, what? I'm a guy, but what did he say? His favorite singer is Whitney Houston.
Oh yeah. His friends are out playing basketball when he's a kid, and he's like, I'm gonna go listen to your mom's Whitney Houston album inside because I'd rather do that. He grew up in theater and he had a Barbie as a kid, and he just was not a traditional boy, but he was still a boy, still a man. And his parents did a great job in valuing his own unique expression of that. But yeah, his point in that sermon, I think it's really important, is that the culture's view of gender is actually far more narrow than God's view of gender. God sees men and women as distinct, but the way that we express manhood and womanhood is very vast. But yet in our culture, you tend to prefer things maybe like my husband did, right? I don't want to play sports. I want to listen to great singers. The culture may say, that's kind of feminine. Maybe you're actually a woman. So the view of manhood and womanhood is actually very narrow, which is why we see so much pushing to switch back and forth. Maybe is we have these tight, narrow boxes for them, where the scriptures really give us, no, your biological body matters, and you need to be true to that. But within that biological body, the bounds are pretty broad for how you might want to express that, and you see that in men and women in the scriptures. There are some things that we need to preserve, but there's a lot of beautiful variety in the expression of that's valuable. And I know plenty of men who, and in marriages, who the man is the more sensitive one than the woman, which doesn't mean he's no less a man and she's no less a woman. It's just they tend to express their manhood and womanhood, maybe not in the way that most people do. And the Bible would say, yes, that's great. Exactly how God made you. You're still man and a woman. But we do have to be wary. Our culture would maybe say something different because their view of gender is actually more narrow, surprisingly.
That is such a great point. I don't think I've ever heard it put quite like that. That narrowing is really, and so if the culture puts such a narrow view on gender, well, of course, then there's a response of, I want to be free from this narrow grid. I'm not like that. Don't put me in this narrow, box. So, Kelly, talk about that. Let's, we're gonna maybe circle back and talk about other false narratives. But what false narrative of the world does this part of our Bible correct? The part that says male and female, he created them.
Well, I think the big thing, the big thing that it's confronting in these verses is that biological gender matters immensely, that it is very important to God. Whether you were created biologically male or female is a part of God's self-portrait to the world and a portraying of him to the world. And so to reject that is to say, my role as an image bearer, I don't want it, and I'm going to reverse it. And I'm going to mask the very thing that God has said is a part of showcasing him to the world. That's a big deal. So biological gender matters a lot to God. Now, does that mean if I have a daughter and she's born biologically female, but she doesn't want to wear dresses and pink, she wants to play soccer and wear shorts and baseball hats, that I need to say, no, you can't do that. You are a girl and you need to wear girly things because that's how we honor God. I don't think it means that. I think it's okay for a girl to be a tomboy, as we might call them, right? But she still should know, I am a girl. I am female. God made me a girl, and it is good for me to preserve that, celebrate it, see it as valuable and good. And I'm a girl who wants to play sports. Awesome. And if you have a son who's the same way, he wants to be in musical theater like my husband did, and he wants to dress up and do pretend and do all these things, we don't need to dampen that. But we do need to advocate for the fact that you were born a boy matters a lot to God. And it is important and valuable and lovely and good. And a preserving of that is important. So that's something that we're seeing culturally happen, is a trying to dismiss biological gender as unimportant, as this tiny little fact. Well, you're biologically male or female, but what are you really on the inside? And that is a problem. Maybe the world, what they're trying to say is, I want to express that this way, and they feel like the box is too narrow, right? But to dismiss biological gender is a huge affront to God and how we were made and what our function is as image bearers, and we need to deal with that. That's, I think, the biggest thing that this passage is confronting. how the biological gender you're given at birth is important for you to embrace, celebrate, and take part in.
Mm. And, so much pressure that we put on ourselves when we set out to decide our own gender, like kids trying to figure out, well, I'm not sure exactly who I am on the inside, rather than like, I just love the clarity of male and female. He created them, male or female. He created you, right? You don't have to be the creator in the story. There already is a creator. And I just love the freedom that you're inviting us to, Kelly, with like, you don't have to look like these other people. You don't have to play the same sports. You don't have to, there is no mold for you because you are uniquely gifted and created by God. So go ahead and express who you uniquely are, but do that within the gender that God has assigned for you. There's so much freedom in that. It seems not freeing. Right. The world would say, no, that's not freedom. Freedom is I get to be whoever I want to be. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, true. I'm going to actually reference something Elizabeth Elliot said in a book called Let Me Be a Woman, because it's such a great analogy in what true freedom is. She talked about a sailboat, that the sailboat that's meant to be on the water with the wind behind it. Could we choose to put it on the sand and say, I don't want to go on the water, I want to go on the sand? You could. And say, I'm free to do that. I'm free to not be a boat on the water. I can be on the land. But that's going to be really frustrating and actually really restraining, because that boat was not created to make any movement whatsoever in sand and on ground. The wind is not going to help it move. It's going to fall over, and it's actually going to restrain it. But to put the boat where it was created to be, on the water, is actually true freedom, because then all the ways that it was created can now flourish and thrive, and it can move all over the place, because that was its function. That was how it was created. And so to embrace the way that we were made and live within the bounds of which we were made is actually the truest form of freedom we will ever experience. Sure, can we rebel against that? We can. Yeah. We can call it freedom, but functionally, it's not actually freedom, it's captivity. And it's actually hindering us from real life and real flourishing.
So good. So in really in creating these different genders and creating male and female to image and to resemble the likeness of God, God has a bigger plan in mind, which we see in these verses. So like, let's look at the verses that follow. 28, I'm reading here from the ESV. And God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And so God starts out by saying, let's, communally, we're going to make some people, and then we're going to make them in our image to represent us. And then God goes ahead and does it. And now he's blessing them, and he's giving us his purpose. And his purpose is all of those things I just mentioned. Like his purpose is that they would be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion. What's surprising about this purpose that God is giving to man and woman?
Yeah, I think there is a lot here that's really beautiful. And I think kind of falls secondarily under that header of this is reflecting something in the nature of God, that as image bearers, he's then entrusting to us the same things that we see in him, that God was not content to dwell on his own, right? His beautiful communal nature and unity together is overflowing into multiplication, creating men and women. And then he gives them that same task, multiply, fill the earth, and not just a multiplication and spreading, but we see rulership, authority, that we're to subdue the earth and rule over things, that God is the great, he is king of the universe. Everything is under his charge. But yet, as his image bearers, he entrusts some of that to his people on the earth as well, to partner with him in that. And it's really beautiful.
Yeah, I wanted to just interject too. Like, this had to be really interesting to the first readers of Genesis, who were a group of people that had just escaped slavery, right? Yes. I like to call them the Wildernite. The Israelites living out in the wilderness, and they're hearing for the first time. I mean, I think this story was probably passed down, but the first time that Moses is compiling their origin story and giving it to them. And he's saying to a group of escaped slaves, no, you were created to spread out in the world, not to be captured, not to be dominated by this horrific ruler. No, you were intended, and God has just freed you. He has let you loose. Now you go be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and represent God. Like, you were designed not to be dominated, but to have dominion. Like,
Yes.
that must have meant so much to them, don't you think?
Oh, it would be shocking. You've been told what to do your whole life. You've just been the slave of somebody else, and here you're hearing that God is not telling them what to do. I mean, He is giving them commands, but in some ways, this is an entrusting of a position of authority over His creation. And I think the other thing that's shocking about it is this is said to them. It is not said just to Adam. It is said to Adam and Eve together.
Yes.
We don't know exactly the order, right? Because we're going to see, I know you're going to get into Genesis 2, and we'll see a play-by-play of how this shows up. But it says that He said to them together, this is entrusted to the two of you, that women are invited into that rule and reign as much as men are, though there's distinctions in how we relate to one another, especially in marriage. Women, male and female, are invited into that rulership, that fruitfulness, that filling and spreading of the image and glory of God in the earth alongside their male counterparts. And that would be really shocking to those early readers as well. I just love pointing out to people how the Bible is very countercultural in its views on women, especially considering the day and the time that it was written.
Yes, so good. So, we kind of see God kind of laying out His purpose here. Why did He create this man and this woman? He created them in His image to kind of send them out to fill the earth. He wanted His image stamped all over the dust of the whole world, right? We are stamped with His image, and He wants us to spread out and be fruitful and reproduce, like produce babies who also represent God's image. But does this just mean, like, I know you're expecting a baby. I'm kind of moving past the age, like it would be a huge shock if I found out I was expecting a baby. I'm 52 now. Or I'm sorry, I'm 51. Why do I keep doing that? I keep adding on a year of my life. I am 51. So yes, I'm 51. And so I'm kind of done with childbearing ages, but am I done now with multiplication and with filling the earth with image bearers? Is my role done there, Kelly?
Well, in physical multiplication, maybe. But no, I think the initial thing that's happening here when there's only two people on the earth, right, is God does have physical multiplication in view. Absolutely. Have a lot of babies. That is functionally the initial reading of this is that. But yet we see as God's plan unfolds throughout the rest of the scriptures that the type of multiplication we're seeing in the New Testament is not primarily one of physical multiplication through the birthing of children, though that is still happening. We see multiplication happening in the spread of the gospel and evangelism and discipleship, that you're seeing that happen in Acts, right? Jesus has come. This new covenant is given. The full manifestation of the hints that we saw in Genesis are happening in the New Testament. Jesus ascends and entrusts again a new commission, just like the commission given here. We're given a new one in the book of Acts and at the end of the book of Matthew, right? To make disciples of all nations. And then you see His disciples do that. They spread out. They're spread out from Jerusalem all over the place. And we see thousands at a time coming to faith. We see them going to their own homes and bringing more to faith. We see discipleship, evangelism, discipleship, making multiple followers of God, that those physical people were already born, but they didn't yet know Him. Now they've come to know Him. And that multiplication we see continues to spread until every person in Revelation, every language group, every people group will have people represented in the kingdom of God, because it really has, the gospel's reached the ends of the earth. So that multiplication, wherever you are on the journey, single, married, past childbearing years, maybe you would like to have a child and you can't, the Lord has not granted that to you, that does not hinder you from being able to fulfill this command that your part of your image bearing is to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth with people who know God and love God. Babies are part of that. but they are not the primary expression of that in the New Testament. It is evangelism and discipleship that we're called to in our fruitfulness.
So beautiful. So like man and woman coming together in marriage, this is something in our physical reality that represents something. It's meant to help us understand God and his plan for the world. His plan is that he would dwell with his people and that the world would be filled with his representation, with his image bearers. And so then, like you mentioned, Acts, we have the very first time that the bridegroom is being united with, like, the church is being born. And so it's like the bride and the bridegroom are coming together, and we have just this explosion of multiplying. I can't remember how many believers came to faith in that first,
like 3,000.
He doesn't enslave. He doesn't create us, like, I think in the mythology, there were like gods who would create his little minions to make food for him or whatever. No, he creates us to represent his rule and his dominion, and to do it with dignity and honor, and to spread the glory of God all over the face of this earth, to subdue the earth, to have dominion, to be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. It's such a big, compelling story, and it's so beautiful that we get to be part of it. So, Kelly, how can we live like this story is true, this origin story?
Well, I think the first thing we can do is embrace our gender. We can embrace our maleness, our femaleness, whichever way God has created us, to just know that's important. And there's something for me in a real practical way as a woman, monthly menstrual cycles. I think about, there's a way to complain about that, but that is one way that the genders are distinct, right?
Yeah.
We can know once we've passed puberty, it's like, this is how I know I'm a woman. And when those things are happening, it's like, okay, Lord, I'm a woman and you've made my body to do this. And that is valuable as an image bearer. And so I'm going to just privately in my own heart say, thank you for making me a woman, and help me to embrace that, and be okay with that. So to embrace our gender and celebrate it in our own hearts, I think is one way we live out this story. And then to celebrate not just our own gender, but the opposite gender as well, that we just choose not to do the gender war thing, that we don't pick up that narrative of men are the worst. And, when someone has something conflict maybe going on within their marriage, to just totally whitewash the entire other gender as less than, right? We don't want to do that. No. Culturally, I think we're seeing that toward men more than toward women right now, that we see a lot of just devaluing of men in effort to try and even the scales or something, But we just, as believers, we don't want to do that. We need to value that manhood is a valuable expression of the image of God. And same for men, that they would embrace their own gender and value women and say both matter equally, both need one another, and that we would celebrate that. And that we would also remember God's generous, and we would put to death any temptation to believe otherwise. I think those are practical ways we can celebrate, live out this story in our day-to-day.
That's so good. Yeah, I just want to echo, it's good that God made you a boy. It's good that we have men, that we have godly men, just calling out that masculinity. My son, this just blessed my heart. My son had a boy in his, I said he's a camp counselor this summer, and he had a boy who was kind of using his masculinity to bully and to, just kind of use his strength to his own advantage. And Kate said that he took that boy's big hands in his own hands. And he said, I did exactly like you used to do, Mom, when I was little. He said, I held his hands and I said, God gave you these hands to protect, not to hurt. That's what my mom used to tell me. And now I'm telling you, he gave you these hands. It's important that you're big and strong, but he gave you these hands to protect and not hurt. And so I just love it. Here's my son calling out the masculinity in another boy. This is how God created you. Embrace it. And we get to spread God's image throughout the earth as we call out, this is what God created you to be. Yes, of course, there are ways that you are unique, but God made you a boy. He made you a man. He made you a woman. He made you a girl. And embracing that is living like this story is true, that God created you, Kelly, to be a woman, me, Shannon, to be a woman, and that he calls that very, very good.
Amen.
So thank you so much. Thanks so much for having this conversation. I always love talking about God's word with you, Kelly.
Me too. It's so fun.
Thanks for joining me for this True Story of the Beginning series. I hope you'll take some time alone with God and with your Bible open to Genesis 1-3. Drink in the true story for yourself, this true story that you're in. Let it reframe your story with the truth. To help you work through this narrative, I've put some tools together for you in my free Live Like It's True workbook. The workbook is particularly designed to help you work through the narratives or the stories in the Bible. It'll help you sort through how the true story of Genesis 1-3 refutes the false narratives in the world. You can find a link for your free workbook in the show notes, along with links to some of the various other resources we've been mentioning and recommending. Many of these resources are actually written by our guests in this season, including Nancy Guthrie, Mary Cassian, Courtney Doctor, and more. Are you enjoying this podcast? If so, would you be willing to rate and review? This helps us widen our reach and helps us to serve others as they're able to find the show. Also, if you have questions or ideas for me, I would love to hear from you. Thanks so much to my producer, Maria Lyons, and my son, Cade Popkin, for providing all of the music that you hear here on the show. And thanks most of all to you for tuning in. It is my joy and privilege to serve you. And now it's time to go live like it's true.